G'day folks, Jeff here with a video of my top 15 Peaceville and Dreamtime releases. Enjoy. This is my first in a series of videos looking at my favourite record labels, and I'm starting with Peaceville Records, which was founded by Hammy in Dewsbury in the UK in 1987. I've only picked actual releases that they've put out themselves and not reissues, so there's no like Unholy or Mayhem or Candlemass or Thorns here. And I'm limiting it to one album per artist, because if I didn't, half of it would be Autopsy and the other half would probably be Katatonia. So yeah, here we go. Enjoy. First up is Autopsy's album Mental Funeral. This is from 1991, and this is my favourite death metal album of all time without fail. Even beats Altars of Madness, which is quite a task. This is just, to me, the essence of death metal. Sludgy guitar sound, massive thumping drums, great chaotic solos, sick lyrics, awesome cover art. I mean, look at that. Obviously, I'm quite a fan. And best of all, just insane, crazed vocals from Chris Ryford, who, yeah, is quite a hero of mine, I've got to say. I've limited this video to only one of his releases at all, because if not, there'd probably be an Abscess album in here and various other of his bands. But anyway, don't get me wrong, I love me some Severed Survival and Acts Unspeakable and all of their stuff, really, and I'm very happy they're working on a new album. But for me, this one's just the perfect combination of their quality death metal and some crawling doom bits. In the Flesh of Winter is probably my favourite song on here, and just it's mind-blowing riff halfway through, and then that sort of lull and build up again to it. It's just incredible. Plus a song about freezing to death, so you can't go wrong there. I've never been a huge fan of the first song, Twisted Massive Burnt Decay. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it, but there's just a lot better songs on it than that. But they always seem to play it live, which is a bit irritating, but oh well. I have been lucky enough to see them live a couple of times at MDF and at Chaos and Taos, and yeah, they ruled. It was one of my highlights of gig going, seeing those blokes live. Other songs on this are Love Dead. It just has, I mean, it's got very few lyrics, as you know, but the lead guitar work on that's just incredible. I think I do like Danny's chaotic style, but I think I like Eric's sort of more classical solos a bit better. Another highlight, of course, is Destined to Fester, which I mean, it's a great song of its own, but I used to watch Alchemist cover it live for many a year back in their, I don't know, early to mid-90s era. And so, yeah, I have great memories of watching crazed circle moshes at the Terrace Bar or at Metal for the Brains or something like that. So, yeah, that song went very well live. The only drama I have with this album, and I wouldn't even say that, is that it doesn't have the song Retribution for the Dead on it, which is from the EP of the same name they released like a year beforehand. I don't know, I just would love to hear that song with proper Mental Funeral live sound. And the only other problem is that it doesn't have Steve DiGiorgio on it. They had him on the first album, Severed Survival. This is a bass player from Satis. He's pretty bloody good. They had him on incredible effect on Fiend for Blood, which him with his fretless bass just, I don't know, sounded amazing. So, I mean, there's nothing wrong with, I think it's Eric Cutler's brother who played bass on Mental Funeral, but yeah, Steve DiGiorgio just would have added an extra level to it. But yeah, mostly I just love this album for the drum sound. It's just the most cavernous, thumpingest drums ever. I'm pretty sure I've seen a picture and it was, yeah, a large drum kit, you could say, and I'm not surprised. And I mean, I really love Chris Ryford's style as well. There's, you know, no blasting on this, hardly any real sort of double bass kind of crazed technical stuff, but it's just thumping, real thumping, and quite a unique sort of style, I think, in death metal. And his vocals are just out of this world, ridiculously good. Crazed screams, deep as hell. Amazing. If you don't have this album, buddy, get it. It doesn't get any better, I'm serious. Up next is Katatonia with The Last Fair Deal Gone Down. I've been a big fan of Katatonia from their early doomy black metal days to their death doom days to now their current melancholic rock sort of style. I'm kind of glad that Peaceville only started with their 4th album, Tonight's Decision, so I don't have to make the terrible choice of which do I prefer out of Brave Murder Day, Discouraged Ones, or this album. So this album wins this battle at any rate. This one is just, to me, it's their most complete album. It's just got a great variety of songs and a strange combination of energy and bleakness. I know it's hard to describe. Jonas seems just a bit more comfortable on this than the previous albums and really allows the emotion to shine through with his great vocals. New drummer Daniel, I think, just adds some extra nuance that they were missing with the previous drummers. But to me, the winner is always Black Imes leads on this. Oh, that man can write a melody, that's for sure. Songs like Dispossession and Chrome, just, it's amazing, the sound. And he sort of didn't seem to use it as much in future, which is kind of a shame, which is probably why I like this album so much. It's just pure melancholy, and it seems to have slowly dropped the Greg or Macintosh Paradise Lost stylings that he had on the earlier albums, just for his own sort of unique sort of style. Production on this is kick-ass as well. Everything sounds great. The songs just seem a bit fuller here, and it's really noticeable when they play Tear Gas live, because it's just more to it. It's a bigger sounding. It's kind of hard to describe. But I'm seeing him in a couple of months in Tasmania at Dark Mofo, so can't bloody wait. And this will be my, I don't know, maybe 4th or 5th time seeing them. Still not holding my breath for any old songs, but I just hope they play a couple of songs off this album. They seem to be playing Tear Gas and Tonight's Music, I think, at the moment. So, yeah, it's going to kick ass. And you really can't go wrong with this album if you're into alternative, metal-y kind of stuff. Oh, amazing album. Up next is Therion with Of Darkness. This is their one and only Peaceville album. This is back when they were a chunky death metal band with lots of Celtic Frost influence and no operas or clean singing at all. They did one album after this in a similar style, which wasn't on Peaceville. It was the Beyond Sanctorum, which I'm pretty sure is being reissued, so I'd check that one out if you can. Don't get me wrong, I like their later stuff. Big fan of Lemuria, sort of Sirius B era, but this holds a special place in my heart, mainly because I'm a huge fan of Swedish death metal, and it's a kick-ass album. Really good songs. Despite this being Swedish and recorded at Sunlight Studios by old mate Thomas Skosberg, this really doesn't sound much like Entombed or Dismembered to me, maybe in parts of the actual music, but overall, it's got its own sound, which I really like. It's got a good variety as well. There's a lot of time changes in the songs, and just lots of good chunky riffs. There's some fast, blasty bits. I really like the solos of, I think, lead guitarist Peter. He just, I don't know, had a very melodic sort of style that you wouldn't think it'd work well with the music, but it really does. The vocals are a good mix of sort of gruff style and a bit of screaming as well. One of Christopher's other bands is Carbonized, that I would definitely recommend you checking out. Very weird sort of grind. So I obviously liked a bit of their grind as well. Some of the lyrics are just, yeah, a little teenage style. Like they've read the lyrics of Scum a few too many times. But who cares? I don't care about lyrics much at all. The music itself is just solid death metal. There's some great slow bits that I think they should have used more, actually. I think they did use it slightly more on the next album. And the sound on this is top notch as well. Although for some reason they must have run out of time in the studio or something, because there's 2 tracks from the previous EP, Time Shall Tell, just bunged on the end for no apparent reason. Totally different sound, but they're good songs, who cares? That's a damn good EP as well. So I really love this album, and I'm surprised it doesn't get more sort of nods in when people talk about Swedish death metal. And obviously the cover art, it sucks. It's one of the worst covers. But if you like your Swedish death metal, definitely check this one out. Don't get thrown by the operas and all sorts of stuff, the symphonic stuff that they do these days. This is a totally different kettle of fish. Next up is Pitch Shifter with Industrial. This is their first album back when they were super heavy industrial metal, and certainly not the drum and bass punky stuff that they turned into later on. This stuff is heavy. Sort of very much a death metal sound, but industrial sort of style. And you can't not mention Godflesh when you talk about super heavy industrial metal. And yeah, there's a few nods to Street Cleaner on this, but yeah, what the hell, it's fine by me. Street Clearing influenced a hell of a lot of other bands that I love, like Dead World and Sonic Violence. Yeah, it's a good thing, I think. I don't mind a bit of hero worship. I think they did improve their songwriting on later albums, Submit and Desensitized, but to me the sound on this is just so heavy that I'd listen to it all the time. My favourite songs would probably be Brutal Cancroid with its killer lead work throughout, Inflammator for its just groovy as hell, and album closer I, which is just heavy, heavy and nasty. I'm forever jealous of my good mate Andy, who saw them live in the UK back around this era, because apparently they were pretty intense live. I've seen footage and they got like crazy bloody flamethrower on stage, and yeah, looks like they had a good time live. And I never realised that this album, until recently, this album cover has a picture of Frank from Blue Velvet on it. Where's my bourbon? This did actually just get reissued, and that's what this record version is a reissue one that Peaceville has put out of the album on CD and vinyl, so still trackable down. I would definitely recommend it. I really wish there were more bands these days making this sort of super heavy industrial metal. It's just a lack of it, and it really is a style that appeals to me a lot. Mainly because I'm a massive Godflesh fan, and I always have been, but it's just a sorely underused style, I think. Peaceville put out some great compilations over the years, and in 1992 they put out Volume 4. Can't imagine where they got their cover art from. This is where I first heard killer bands like At the Gates, The Gathering, Vital Remains, as well as some of the Dreamtime bands, G.G.F.H, Kong and Sonic Violence, but we'll get to them later. But it's also where I heard the first song that I heard from the next album in my top 10. That first song that I heard was A Blaze in the Northern Sky by Darkthrone, and it was not what I was expecting at all, I've got to say. I was a huge fan of their previous album, Soulside Journey, which of course was quirky, weird death metal, so when I hear this coming through all screechy and raw sounding, it was, yeah, quite an eye-opener, but yeah, it didn't take me long to really work out this was bloody awesome music. This pretty much was my introduction to the second wave of black metal, whatever that means. And I must admit, it did take me a while to get used to, but it was worth it when I did. After listening to that song a lot of times, as well as everything on this compilation really, yeah, I tracked down the album Quick Smart when it came out. Obviously they were grimmer and meaner sounding on the next couple of albums, Under a Funeral Moon and Transylvanian Hunger, but to me, I like this album the most because it's a combination of their styles, really. It still has some hangovers of the death metal technical sort of style that they had on Soulside Journey, and just had really bloody good songs, to tell the truth. I think I mostly like this. It's just a bit more dynamic than their later stuff. Just has a bit more variety to it. It still has some, you know, weird off-tempo drumming and time changes and some really killer lead work. These days I mostly listen to this and Panzerfaust because they're just really bloody riffy, and of course obviously have quite a lot of Celtic Frost influence, which is fine by me. But of course the highlight really is In the Shadow of the Horns, which just has everything really. Has that silly Nocturno Culto bit at the start, has that weird acoustic bit at the end that sort of doesn't seem in time and just seems kind of odd, but I don't know, it really works. But yeah, it just has that thumping riff all the way through it that builds to really quite a decent climax, I've got to say. It just gets faster and faster, and yeah, amazing song. If you've heard it, you know. But then you go to Where the Cold Winds Blow, which really shows a blueprint of their latter albums with a lot more tremolo guitaring and Nocturno Culto just going pretty berserk on the vocals. Killer stuff. For years I would proclaim that Soulside Journey was the best, probably just to be a contrarian kind of guy, but I always knew it was this. There's a reason why this album's so popular, because it really is that good. Get it now. For this next one, I'm cheating and picking two releases. I can't resist. Both of these were recorded at the same time and sound pretty bloody similar, and I just can't choose between them really because they've both got such killer songs. This is another band that I first heard on Volume 4 with their version of Lovelorn Rhapsody, which, yeah, after the somewhat lighter Pentagram song that starts the compilation, yeah, Lovelorn Rhapsody's super heavy death doom certainly got my attention. Let me put it that way. Obviously, Anathema has changed quite a bit over the years. I do quite enjoy their more recent stuff with the We Hear Because We Hear and Weather Systems sort of era. But I actually really don't particularly enjoy their middle era, especially the last couple of albums with Peaceville. The next album after this was The Silent Enigma, and that's a good album, but yeah, it's sort of them finding their way. So it's a middle period album that just doesn't really work particularly well. I'm sure people will kill me for saying that, but yeah. Highlights on Crestfallen for me are And I Lust, which builds to some really nice guitar work, and The Sweet Suffering, which also builds to just killer climax that nearly rivals A Simple Mistake, which is probably one of my favourite of their later songs. Serenade highlights are Sweet Tears, which is a bit of a rockier song with a nice lead solo all the way through it, and the somewhat gothically titled Under a Veil of Black Lace, which is just gloomy as hell. Has a nice acoustic bit, and then which leads up to a bit that kind of always makes me chuckle, where he just yells, "I loved her!" I shouldn't laugh. Serious stuff. I should also mention the song Sleepless, which is sort of half goth rock, half metal really, but mainly because local Canberra band Codpiece used to cover it live, so I've seen their version live a lot of times over the years, and they did it very well. It's a great song, and I think occasionally they still play a sort of version of it live. You ain't ever going to hear any of the real doomy gloomy stuff live these days, I don't think, which is a shame, but oh, both have nice little acoustic interlude bits with female vocals that, I don't know, are really nice. I think the Serenades one, the French one, wins for me, but both are beautiful songs. Really good work. The sound on both of these is excellent. Done by Mags at Academy Studios, and he did a heap of British metal bands such as Cradle of Filth, Solstice, My Dying Bride, and Battle Sagoth. So bloke obviously knew what he was doing. Absolutely killer melancholy death doom. Well worth checking out. Next is My Dying Bride with The Angel in the Dark River. This is the only really tricky one I think for me on this list, because I love all eras of My Dying Bride, and it was a very close call between this as The Flower Withers and their later album, The Dreadful Hours, which, it's a great album. I started off with them from the Symphonaire EP back in the day, mainly because I used to play the clip on Rage all the time, even though it was a pretty awful clip really. It was a great song. And of course, Volume 4, a good compilation, had Erotic Literature, which is a great song as well. I never really quite clicked with Turn Loose the Swans, to tell the truth, and a couple of songs really do rule. This one's the first one with the just clean vocals, and which, considering I like his crowd vocals a lot, it's a bit of a surprise I chose this, but it's just bleak and melancholy, and he does it so well. This has probably my favourite My Dying Bride song, From Darkest Skies, which just has that massive organ, super chunky riff. Martin Powell's still on violin on this album, and he does a great job of adding extra anguish to the songs, especially on Black Voyage, which has a slow section that sounds sneakily like a Paradise Lost song, Crying for Eternity. Your Shameful Heaven's another corker, and it's a bit faster. It sounds like it could have been on the first album, really. Personally, I don't think you can go wrong with any My Dying Bride album, but if you want to get a doom fix, I'd recommend checking this one out. However, for me, the best of the Peaceville 3 Death Doom bands was Paradise Lost with their masterpiece, Gothic. Really doesn't get much better than this, I've got to say. Compared to the other two, this is pretty concise Death Doom, really, with only one song over 5 minutes, and generally a slightly faster tempo, but boy do they bring the melancholy. Not sure what it is about this album, but it's just always sounded kind of alien to me. It's got a sparse production, but maybe I just hadn't heard anything like it at the time. It certainly blew my socks off. Vocalist Nick Holmes sounds amazing here with massive growls, and I was very sad when he retired his growling in the later albums. I do remember reading an interview with him where he was talking about Gregor's guitar work and saying that he didn't want to growl over the top of such beautiful work. I just remember thinking, why the hell not? It sounds bloody awesome. Not sure if this was the first use of female vocals in Death Doom sort of stuff, but I'd hazard to guess it probably was, and it's used very effectively on a couple of songs. I heard this before I heard their first album, Lost Paradise, which has always just sounded a bit turgid to me, a bit too dreary, which is probably a good thing in Doom, but I don't know, this album is just a bit more lively, After this, they left Peaceville and signed with Music for Nations, put out Shades of God, which is probably nearly as good an album, really. After that, I don't like it as much. I've got to say, I know they're back to their sort of deathy singing days these days, but yeah, this is still the highlight for me by a mile. One thing I'll whinge about is the cover art. It's just shit. It's obviously an inside someone's leather jacket. It's like, really? That's all you're putting on? That's what you're putting on your album cover? I don't know. Maybe it's because Lost Paradise had such a cool cover as well, but that's the one letdown for me, really, other than the fact it could be longer, but oh well. I've seen them live 2 or 3 times, and I'm still a bit sad that I've never seen a song off this album. I don't know why. It was a massive hit for them, made them huge, but I don't know, maybe they just don't like it. It's a waste. I'm hoping now that Nick's growling a bit more that maybe they'll start doing songs off it, but I don't know when I'll get a chance to see him again anyway, so I can't recommend this highly enough. This is one of the greatest albums of all time, really, and well worth checking out. I wish I'd had more of the early punk Peaceville stuff back in the day, like Electro Hippies and Doom. But one thing I did have was Prophecy of Doom and their Acknowledge the Confusion Master album. Prophecy were a death metal grind sort of band, obviously heavily influenced by crust punk bands like Amoebics. I think maybe the first Bolt Thrower album, In Battle There Is No Law, is a reasonable reference point. It actually reminds me of old Melbourne punk band Bean Flipper. It was just had that sort of punks playing metal kind of style to it, which can work really well, and it does in this case. The sound on this is very thick and bass heavy with very distorted deep vocals. I actually think the sound on this is a bit too muddy in parts, and I kind of prefer this Peel sessions from around the same era. It's just a bit clearer sounding, and a bit rawer. One of the weird bits of this is some really weird high-pitched screams that are obviously being put through a processor of some variety. It just sounds like Mick Harris on acid with a couple of effects pedals. It kind of takes you out of the atmosphere a bit, I've got to say. Although, that said, the atmosphere can get a bit plodding at times with just all very bassy. This CD actually comes with a bonus album by Axe Grinder at the end that I listened to it the other day and just, for some reason I never listened to it. I don't know why. I just stopped at Prophecy of Doom for some reason. So if you like your crust punk, heavy as hell, check it out. I think Peaceville has reissued this on record as well, so get buying. Number 10 is Opeth with Still Life. This is their one and only Peaceville album, which just happens to be my favourite, so it was very convenient. My friend Ian used to ramble at me at gigs about how amazing Morning Rise was, and Opeth just never really clicked until I got a copy of this. I do enjoy their earlier stuff, but this to me is just the perfect combination of that noodlier sort of early style and then their later progressive stuff. It's just magical, I gotta say. This is one of those bands that kind of lost track with over the years, mainly because their stuff was just a bit too mellow and sort of fiddly for my liking. I probably should check them out more often, I've got to say. I'd probably put My Arms, Your Hearse and Blackwater Park at nearly this level, because I think it was just a really fresh sort of era for the band. They just really seemed to be coming up with some great ideas, and they just manifested perfectly on this one. It's got riffs galore in it, it's got lovely mellow bits, and Michael's vocals are just very nice. The production is like miles better than the previous album as well. I'm sure there's more technically eared people than me don't like it all as much as the later stuff, but sounds perfect to me. The clean vocals on Moonlapse Vertigo and Face of Melinda just work so perfectly, and Blake has a killer growl too. I'm really glad that he did Bloodbath. We had a chance to hear him doing his full death metal style, because yeah, it's sorely missed, I've got to say. But I think he sings it's a bit silly these days, which is a shame. I highly recommend this album if you like older Opeth or newer Opeth, but I can't imagine if you like Opeth you haven't heard it, so check it out. Okay, so that's the top 10 of Peaceville done. Some of these were released on their sublabel Def Records, which I never quite understood the point of, because it just seemed to put out death metal mostly, which so did the main label. Oh well. One band that didn't make this list was At the Gates, who pretty popular band, as you may well be aware of, but that has never really quite clicked for me in their Peaceville era. I do like some of their songs. Kingdom Gone's a great song, but yeah, it just was a bit noodly. I don't like noodly, as you might have guessed. But they did also put out some other killer death metal bands like Baphomet, which turned into Banished, I think, and Impaler and Accidental Suicide, but there's only so many you can choose. Next up is their sublabel Dreamtime Records, which is their home for all their weird experimental, mostly sort of electronic or, I don't know, non-metal sort of style. It's a label that really appealed to me because I've always liked the weirder style of music as well. And this compilation, Head Your Mind, was pretty informative for me, I'd say, in those days. It has all of their bands on it. They really didn't have that many bands. I've barely even got a top 5 albums of theirs. But yeah, it was a very good compilation that really did widen my eyes into what could be done in music. So I was very happy that they did so much stuff on Dreamtime, even though there wasn't a huge amount of it. But some of it is my favourite bands. First up is G.G.F.H with Disease. Never been quite sure how to categorise this band, but let's just go with sinister industrial dance music. It's not too dissimilar to something like Front 242 or Skinny Puppy in format at any rate, but subject matter, this is a lot darker. I actually hear quite a bit of this in Perturbator actually these days. I don't know if G.G.F.H were an influence of theirs or if they both just had the same influences in the first place, but there's a number of bits where I'm sitting there going, oh, I know that sound. And yet I've never seen them mentioned in any interviews. Who knows? Maybe I'm just hearing things. Disease is their second album, and I think it's their peak for me. Just has a better production, more intricate songs, and has a slightly more techno kind of feel, which doesn't sound great, but it's a lot dancier than their other albums, which also doesn't sound great, but believe me, it's well worth checking out. I think I might have already had their first album, Eclipse, on tape at the time, but when I heard the song Room 213 on the Head Your Mind compilation, it blew my mind. It was weird style, lots of female vocals and Ghost just singing sinister stuff. It's all about Jeffrey Dahmer's Apartment 213, so as you can imagine, it's not the nicest of songs. And the version on Disease is even more mind-blowing, really. It's got an extra weird cascading technical sound that just awesome. Love it. Another key song is Dead Men Don't Rape, which was covered by Bloodthorn and Red Harvest, although I don't like their metal versions as much as the original because it's just sinister song. It's a rape revenge fantasy a la I Spit on Your Grave, and just has a jackhammer beat in it that's hard to be believed. Hands is another favourite song of mine, as it builds up to this awesome dance bit. And there's some odd songs on here. There's one called Confession that is some serial killer's confession, and it's just it's pretty gross, but in a good way. For those wondering, G.G.F.H stood for Global Genocide Forget Heaven, or apparently in their early days, Goat Guys from Hell. Eclipse is certainly worth checking out. It's a bit rawer than this and has sort of more guitars and stuff, but yeah, that's just as evil an album. And the demos compilation, Halloween's, yeah, they're pretty raw, some of those songs, but yeah, no less sinister. I have no idea whether I'll be able to provide a link to any music of this band. It'll probably just be YouTube links because I don't think they have a Bandcamp or anything, which is a shame. But yeah, if you can track any down, do it. Well worth it. Next up is Ship of Fools with Out There Somewhere. Ship of Fools are a strange British band that played sort of psychedelic, groovy, keyboard-oriented space rock. You could probably put them in similar boat to Hawkwind or Marillion or Osric Tentacles, but honestly, I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm not a huge fan of any of those bands, but I'm a huge fan of this though. It's all instrumental. It's just lots of weird keyboard. There's 2 keyboardists in the band. It's very dreamy sort of music. I think I like this quite a lot because it's very similar to some parts of one of my favourite Aussie bands, Alchemist, who from my previous videos you might gather I'm quite a fan of. It's entirely instrumental, although it does have a number of samples from what sounds like the Moon Landing and Wizard of Oz for some reason, but yeah, it does work very well, and you don't really notice the lack of vocals. one of the keyboardists, Les, went on to join Anathema and Cradle of Filth, and I do remember seeing pictures of Cradle of Filth wearing Ship of Fools shirts, which I was very jealous about. One thing I love so much about this is the cover art as well, which, as you can see, I got a poster of and framed it on my wall. So, yeah, great artwork. The earlier album, Close Your Eyes, Forget the World, is pretty bloody good as well. I'd recommend tracking that down if you can. But this newer album was just a bit more upbeat, a bit more groovy. Guidance's Internal is probably my favourite song on it. It's just got this driving bass line and all sorts of weird spacey sounds. This album kind of reminds me of an acid trip. Starts with a couple of really frenetic sort of groovy songs, and so there's a couple of longer, mellower songs, and then the final sort of come down song of Eternal Guidance refrain, which, yeah, works very well, I think. This to me is just really groovy, really fun music, just puts me in a great mood. Can't go wrong. They did actually reissue a compilation of some songs off each album. There's only really 2 albums of theirs. So you may still be able to track that down, or you may be able to track the albums down, but I would highly recommend it. Great band. Next up is Kong with Push Comes to Shove. And Kong were a weird sort of instrumental, I don't know, progressive rock sort of band almost from the Netherlands. Their first 3 albums were on Peaceville and all pretty bloody good, but this one I think was the peak for me. They were a strange band. They apparently live when they played, they would play on 4 different stages, all in the corners of the room, all with their own PAs. So you would get a full circular sort of style, which, I don't know, sounds kind of cool to me. Would love to have seen it. I have no idea how they did their timing and everything. I'd hope they could at least, see the drummer or something like that. They're obviously very good musicians, so maybe they didn't need to, but no, it's great stuff. It's a weird sort of style. I don't even know what to compare it to. Yeah, as I said, sort of progressive rock, but then there's some, like, I don't know, Rammstein-y sounding dance metal sort of style bits. It's odd, very odd style. There's like keyboard, and I think one of the members is a keyboarder, so there's all sorts of weird samples and sounds going on. It's a bit dancey, but it's a bit rocky, and I don't know. I'm not selling it very well, but it's a killer bloody album. They did use some samples, but again, totally instrumental, same as the last band. They are still going, I believe. I'm not sure what members are in there anymore. Their albums after this weren't too shabby either, but to me this was a peak. This is one that I got so lucky on. It was one of those albums that I thought, oh, I really want to track that down. I'd seen it listed somewhere. This is, obviously pre-internet days when I couldn't just order it on Discogs or anything like that. And I thought about it, and then eventually I went to Cash Converters, which is like a porn store. That's PAWN, dirty people. And yeah, there it was, $5. Couldn't believe it. I've gotten very lucky like that over the years. Maybe it's one of those wishful thinking ones where you just focus on it enough and, well, there it is. So, very happy to find that one. Very good album.
Champion, a winner in any engine, in any car. Champion.
Next up is Tekton Motorcore with their Human Race Ignition album. As you can see, I don't actually own this one, but, oh well, one day maybe. They're a very weird Slovenian band. Sort of techno-y, dancey sort of stuff. Definitely not metal, but they did have metal parts in them occasionally. The weirdest thing about them, though, was that all their songs seem to be based around motor racing. So throughout every song, there's all sorts of, motor F1 sounding sort of car samples, as well as a ton of samples of like commentators going on about, gear changes and speed and everything like that. The music itself is, mostly sort of, I don't know, kind of trance sort of style, I think. Again, I don't really know what I'm talking about, but it's dancey sort of stuff. But then they'll use like sort of operatic female vocals occasionally, and there'll be bits that sound like a, just kind of like a synthy pop sort of song. And then they'll use like hard guitar samples, which I swear is out of bloody Judas Priest Painkiller album. I don't know, I've got to work out what riff it is, but it sounds very similar. Honestly, it's not the greatest album of all time, but it was always sort of a bit of a novelty. The weird motor racing sounds get a bit samey after a while, I've got to say. There's only so many times you can hear it. But yeah, it's still good for a listen. So yeah, not the greatest band, and this is really just padding out the top 5 of Dreamtime, but definitely worth a listen if you're interested into that sort of thing. Last one is Sonic Violence with Jagd. I'm kind of cheating on this really, because this specific album was released on Peaceville. It was actually on Def Records, I think. But their second album was released on Dreamtime, so close enough. Should be right. So this is punishing, crusty industrial metal. Very much like Godflesh, but I think it's a bit more like Killing Joke and Amoebics, really, to tell the truth. This is just heavy stuff. I actually prefer the slower songs on this, because they're just driving. That's the only way to put it. They're just ridiculously thumping. The drumming is one of the main highlights. It's very sort of similar styled. Doesn't really vary a huge amount, but it's just non-stop and really gives it a power. My favourite songs on it are Ritual, which is just pounding, and Tortured, which has a weird sort of classical bit at the start, like just little snippets of some classical song. But it doesn't really sound like it should work, but it kind of does. The CD version of this comes with 3 extra songs from their Casket Case EP, which is very similar but a lot rawer sort of sound, so I don't think they're quite as good, but the songs are, but the sound just kind of lacks a bit. I think they're back together actually as of now, or at least 1 or 2 members. I have a feeling that one of the main guys got booted out for the second album, and the second album's nowhere near as good as this, I don't think. I don't actually even own it, so... but yeah, I think they're back together now, so I'm looking forward to see what they can develop, because as I said before about Pitch Shifter, this is a style that I really wish there was more of. I'm really surprised there aren't more sort of heavy industrial metal bands. Maybe I'm just not looking hard enough. But yeah, I would definitely recommend checking this out. Well, if you made it this far, thanks for watching. Next up is Relapse Records, which will probably be quite a bit longer, I think. They have a lot more bands and a lot more releases than Peaceville ever did, so yeah, that should be fun. After that, I'm probably planning on doing, I'd say, Earache, maybe Roadrunner, mainly because I'm an old geezer and they're the bands of my youth, or the labels of my youth that put out some great stuff. So if you've got any requests, yeah, feel free to chuck them in the comments, and also feel free to put your own favourite Peaceville bands in the comments. As I said, I didn't do Out the Gates, so if you love them, go for it. So thanks again for watching. Cheers. See yous. While editing, I realised I forgot to mention Hammy's book. This arrived in the mail the other day. I haven't read any of it yet, but it looks pretty thick. Looks like it should be a good read, I reckon. It says just the tales of Peaceville and so on. I'm sure they had some dramas. I know that Doom did put out an album called Fuck Peaceville, so obviously they weren't too happy with them at some point. This came out on Hell Segundo or Cult Never Dies, so yeah, track it down.